As a reminder, my thesis is an exploration of material transformation. This area of interest stems from the way I prefer to work, investigating boundaries and absolute definitions of everyday objects in order to challenge what we may think we know about their predefined role. By juxtaposing these everyday objects, I want to observe and explore what broader tensions or areas of inquiry are suggested. In VerbList, Richard Serra compiled a series of what he called actions to relate to oneself, material, place, and process. This list suggests a common ground underlying his practices in all mediums, from early sculptures to later monumental works, which not only twist and curve, but also enclose, surround, and encircle. VerbList influenced my own work, which you see here, by helping me think about how one could visualize a verb. Phil Chang images aim to confound expectations and complicate our understanding of what constitutes a photograph. He employs both digital and analog modes of photographic production and reproduction in his work. I came upon his work after our material abstraction project, initially because of the resemblance between his untitled prints, seen here, and my pixel portraits. In the Untitled series, he uses monochromes to progressively increase in chromatic intensity, while for replacement ink cartridges for Epson printers on Epson premium glossy paper, a simple manual gesture of a sweeping streak of ink applied to a sponge mimics the markings of a printer stuttering as it runs out of ink. Abby sent me Heather Oaklis as a reference a few weeks ago. Her work corresponded to the collage work I was doing on our site project at the time, and as I began researching more about her process, I came across OPP, Other People's Portraits. The series OPP is a collection of hand-woven silver gelatin and inkjet prints that survey stereotypical and nostalgic notions. They use found photographs from U.S. Army wives' gatherings and Hollywood film stills and weave them together to construct new narratives. The simple act of dismantling these mid-century stereotypes in order to reconstruct them in a distorted manner is the driving force behind her series. I felt this idea, creating new narratives by combining existing ones, spoke to my work on our site project, but I was specifically attracted to the grid-like structure of her process. I tried experimenting with this earlier this week by revisiting some of my earlier Form Studio work. I printed out 8.5 by 11 copies and cut them into strips, collaging them together. Initially, I was mixing up different pieces from many photos, but then in time I realized that I liked the collages I was making with the less is more approach, combining only 2 images and being selective with the pieces that I was using. Aaron Sheriff's area of interest is in the in-between states. This shifts the focus of the object to its formal characteristics, volume, shape, and dimension. She uses abstract and geometric forms as representational elements, often blurring the line between 2- and 3-dimensional space. She discussed the idea of an openness to objects when put into undefined situations, which I felt echoed my own interest in exploring object boundaries and predefined roles. In her photographs, she pieces together images of separate sculptural forms, demonstrating that sculpture can be crafted in 2 dimensions. Her photographic series, seen here, entitled AP, was what led me to simplify my own process in the collages that I just shared. So much was being said with just 2 images. What could I say with less? I was also intrigued by the ease at which her work seemed to flow between 2 and 3 dimensions. These small sculptures were then photographed and digitally spliced to conjoin 2 halves of different objects, creating photographic documentation of a sculpture that does not exist physically. This was a point that was brought up in last week's critique, and it is an idea I now see possibly having a place in my own practice. Though the image itself didn't jump out to me, when I read the title of it, When is an Image Not an Image, I knew the process of creation would resonate. Darren Harvey Reagan entwines image and object, creating another hybridization of photography and sculpture. His works are described as being as quietly humorous as they are frustrating, as they challenge the viewer to distinguish where representation ends and the object begins. His series, The Beauties of a Common Tool Rephrased, seen here, started as a response to Walker Evans' Beauties of the Common Tool, which, when it was originally shot in 1955, used photography to capture the beauty of seemingly banal and commonplace objects. Harvey Reagan had initially been making collages of Evans' tool images, but he said the inevitable next stage was to source matching tools, cut them in half, and then rejoin them to emulate those first digital montages. The notion of tension in collage is something I've just begun experimenting with, as seen here in my site project final. This week, in an attempt to move beyond the IKEA cart, I started photographing discarded car parts that I've been collecting from Pick and Pull. For those not familiar, Pick and Pull is a junkyard for wrecked or non-functional cars. Mechanics come here to scrap parts for use. The cost is usually less than retail, and you just need knowledge and a bit of time. When it comes to Pick and Pull, I am an outsider. I have no mechanical knowledge when it comes to cars, and most of the time I have no idea what I'm looking at. Parts from engines and interiors litter the ground. Discarded relics no longer of value. I often think about when this car came off the assembly line, and who would have thought that this is where it would have ended up. As I was saying though, I've been collecting from here for about 5 months. With every trip, I gather small parts with dynamic profiles or shapes. I photographed a few of them over the summer, seen here, in an attempt to continue my form studio work. This week, however, I began photographing some of the new parts that I've gathered simply as a means to document them, nothing more. A quick observation of these photographs earlier this week produced some curious matchups that caught my attention. Their similar shapes suggested a schism that was similar to my collage work, and now having seen Harvey Reagan's Beauty series, I'm intrigued to see how the act of translation from physical to digital and back to physical could be applied here. Darren Harvey Reagan described the work of his Beauty series as things existing in a type of tension not solely reducible to the medium you see them in. I'd like to continue moving towards step 3 by exploring this idea, but also by building upon my work from this past week, using photographs of parts to create a collage of reconfigured objects, which can then be translated back to a physical object.